Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third Food for Thought session. This is a very short lunchtime seminar, a conversation, if you may, with some experts in the industry. And it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Paolo Aversa, who is a senior lecturer and associate professor at Cass Business School in our Faculty of Management. Is clearly a beloved friend and colleague who clearly we admire a lot in his expertise in digital businesses, in business models, of course, is highly appreciated not only by us, his colleagues, so to speak, but also the larger academic community. He has won many awards, and perhaps he clearly has won a lot of academic awards, but I think Paolo might be more pleased with his award in which in 2018 he was recognized as the world's best 40 under 40 professor by the Poets and Quants Society. Which is clearly goes a lot to show that he's clearly admired by his students as well. So Paolo has a lot of expertise in digital businesses. He does a lot of research in a variety of areas. A lot of it is clearly in sports, especially Formula One. Many of you clearly know his research in Formula One, but perhaps what many of you do not know is that he also does some little bit of research in the alcoholic beverages industry as well, in spirits, right? As long as he doesn't mix these two in the real world, I think he'll be fine.
No drink and drive.
Yeah. I'm sure many of you already know Paolo very well. He's very friendly, very approachable, and I'm sure you can always contact him after the session as well. Remember, we only have 30 minutes together. We want to have a conversation followed by some Q&A. So it's always a good idea to start putting in your questions so that we have some time to answer them as well. So let me remind you, it's just 30 minutes. So please start putting in your questions as soon as you have them in the back of your mind. Also, please do use the chat functionality that we have over here to engage in a conversation with the wider community that is logging in. Paolo, we can see a very sizable number of participants already over here. So without further ado, the stage is yours. Tell us a little bit about if you want to succeed in the digital economy, what kind of a business model should we be thinking about?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. I would like to thank Dr. Anish Banerjee, Professor Caroline Wiertz, and Professor Andres Spicer, and the wonderful community at CAS, both CAS staff and CAS broader community that's here with us today, and that put up this wonderful opportunity for us to entertain you while you're probably roasting your steak or having your pizza at lunchtime or your salad. So as you could see, I climbed on top of Bunhill Row to have this wonderful view and to show you that it's great to be here with you guys in the City of London and talk about something that is very dear to our heart, like the digital economy and business models, and these are topics that are very core to CAS research. We have professors in strategy, marketing, innovation that are experiencing and studying and writing and teaching about these topics, and so it's good to share a bit of our collective knowledge. So what I'm going to talk about is not just about my point of view on this aspect, but it's let's say, a point of view that I think might represent a lot of the school's point of view. So let's start with, an obvious consideration. So we've been facing what one could potentially call the perfect storm, right? In a few months, the economy, let's say, particularly the world economy and the British economy particularly has been facing two major challenges. One is, of course, the coronavirus, and the other one is, let's say, the Brexit, or at least, the preliminary acts of the Brexit. These are things that happen, I guess, once every 1,000 years. So congratulations for being a part of these great changes. And but the point is, what can we do? What can we say as scholars, academic intellectuals about how to surf through the perfect storm? Now, we have to really try to make an effort to really be analytical about what's going on, what's happening, and relate this major change to our perspective. So whenever there is a shock and the storm we've been going through, we have to take into consideration one simple but quite relevant aspect. So not all companies are affected the same way by a shock, okay? Every time there is a shock in nature or in business, in politics, there are fundamentally three macro groups of companies. One, what we could call the pre-adapted companies. So meaning companies that due to their nature, due to the type of business they have, the type of business model they have, the type of products they produce or how they deliver it, they end up having a natural competitive advantage. Imagine if you were the lucky owner of a mask producer or a ventilator producer during these times, or even if you had a business that was highly required during COVID time and maybe that was running mostly online. This would give you a natural competitive advantage, which means that probably you have benefited from the shock. Unfortunately, the companies in this group are relatively few. The great majority of companies usually are in a group that can be considered adaptable companies, meaning companies that are not fitting the conditions created by the shocks, but with some strategic adaptation can actually fit it. And we're going to talk specifically about these companies. And then the third group, which is the sort of non-adaptable companies. So companies whose type of activities, because of their nature, can hardly be replicated in a condition like the one of COVID, or also for certain things, the combination of COVID and Brexit. And so they require a full mutation. So adapting is not sufficient. You definitely need to enter into a new business to stay alive. Otherwise, au revoir. So it is quite likely to stop the contingency. For example, a type of service that, as you can probably imagine, I don't use much, but many of you do, is a hairdresser, right? And it has been incredibly complicated for people who have, for example, hairdresser companies to really deliver their services, because of course when COVID pandemic spread, the main problem was the face-to-face interaction. So today I'm going to talk about two types of suggestion for digital businesses, and they're going to be grouped into two groups. One is a group of basic suggestions, and another one is a group of advanced suggestions. And this will mostly relate to the topic of the business model. So what is the business model? The business model is a simplified representation of a company's value creation and value capturing activities. It is a sort of schema that help us communicate what our business actually does and how it engages with its customers. Now, let's start with a basic suggestion. Just to open the conversation, and maybe then we can bring forward with some questions. So imagine you have a brick and mortar business model, and you are among those companies who's thinking about going online because some part of your customer engagement cannot be really developed in face-to-face. Like, for example, a shop, a store, or for example, a restaurant. So if you're moving from brick and mortar to business model online, you have to consider how to design a customer experience that is better than your competitors. Just being online will not provide you a superior competitive advantage, because there might be other companies that are already doing the same, and you have to really think how to make it better. Let me give you an example. A lot of supermarkets gave the possibility of, for example, going and shop online, or potentially those who didn't have an online store, they could take order and deliver. In some cases, these companies implemented a system that would tell the consumer when the shopping bag was ready and was prepared inside the shop, so they could come and collect the bag without waiting in line outside the store, which would make the experience of the consumption easier and also more pleasant, without having to stand in line for hours to get the chance of walking through the store. And this can be delivered online. Another thing is, a lot of companies that have online business models still have parts of the business model which is not run online. Like, for example, think if you have, for example, a restaurant and you want to do online delivery, still the physical delivery still happens outside the online space. So you have to make sure that you provide a solution to you overcome the challenges that happen in the face-to-face interaction. For example, if you have a restaurant, you might receive a lot of requests during lunchtime, so you have to come up with enough people that deliver the food to all your customers without getting it too cold. And another very important aspect is, once you have established a very strong business model, potentially online, At this point, try to diversify your business model, adding others on the side, because this provides a solution against other type of risks that might arise in the future time. And from this basic suggestion, then we move to the advanced suggestion. And this is something that I'm reporting from a paper that is what I would call a very CAS paper, because it's been co-authored by 4 people that have a strong affiliation with CAS. Myself, Professor Stefan Affliger, which is also a professor at CAS Business School, Francesca Weller, which is one of our PhD students, and Danielle Reza, which is currently a product manager at Samsung Electronics, but formerly she was an MSc student at CAS. And the original idea of this paper was actually coming from a project that she had developed for her final thesis, a final piece of work, her BRP at the MSc in Management. So when you try to develop a digital business model portfolio, there are 3 things that you should try to do. So imagine when you create a portfolio of multiple type of business model at the same time, you're effectively engaging with multiple customer groups. So 3 things that you need to do is 1, try to increase the network effects, meaning try to create increasing affiliation advantages for one group to join based on the affiliation of another group. Imagine, for example, Amazon that has, movies for Amazon Prime and people who watch the movie. The more movie you have, the more the people will be willing to basically join Amazon Prime, and the more people join Amazon Prime, the more movie houses will be happy to put movies online through Amazon Prime. Increase one-stop shop effects. So try to create multiple customer experiences within your platform, within your website, and try to use the data from multiple customer experiences to understand how these are connected. So if somebody watches a movie about, or a series about something that is very popular at the moment, I don't know, maybe you watch the new series on Michael Jordan, maybe you feel like you want to buy a jersey of Chicago Bulls. Okay, these things can have some sort of correlation, and especially when you run multiple business models online, you can connect the data and try to identify superior one-stop shop effects. And finally, try to build an integrative business model. Integrative business models are bundled business models that sometimes do not deliver money value. They're not profitable themselves, but they help scholars, not just scholars, but managers create superior advantage within the portfolio of the business model. And I have a graph to show you. I don't know if we have time for it because it's a bit complex. Anish, what do you think?
Yes, maybe just a quick view of that. I think that'll be useful for the Q&A, I think. That's why.
Okay, so this is a very complex graph that is within our paper. It's actually not that complex, but basically, if you read the paper, to read this graph, you'll have to understand what the different boxes are. So boxes are stocks, underlying elements are decisions, say labels without any sign are consequences. The solid lines are positive consequences, and the dotted lines are negative consequences. Basically, what we show with this model, and maybe later on I can guide you through it step by step, is that by increasing the network effects, the one-stop shop effects, and the integrative business model, you basically increase your customer base, increase the customer data, and you basically nurture firm's growth and superior profiling of your customer. This meaning that the customers have a better service, a better consumption experience, and they are locked in your service. Think, for example, what Amazon does, or Google, for example. And superior revenues are also come with superior competitive advantage. Also, by creating a portfolio that is very complex, you're somehow hiding through causal ambiguity the reason of your competitive advantage, which makes your business model more inimitable against competitors. This in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that paper. I am sure many students or many future students who are tuning in case you missed that, Paolo did mention it, the idea, the original idea, part of it clearly came from one of his, I think she was your student, right, Paolo?
Yes, correct.
Yes. And so you can see that students can also come up with really clever ideas, which can lead to really good top academic publications. Yeah. So that's a side
Absolutely.
note. Yeah, that's a side note for many of you who might be ambitious from a more academic point of view. There are clearly lots of opportunities over there. Yeah. There's a very nice question that has already come up, and I was also thinking a little bit on the same lines, and it's perhaps a tricky one to answer, which is a little bit like this, which is how might firms test various new business models to figure out which one would be successful? It's almost like looking into the future. Is there any suggestion that you might have that firms can use to try out different business models?
Absolutely. So first of all, business models are seldom truly new to the world. They're usually new to the industry. But usually those business models you think of importing into your company, into your industry, exist somewhere else. So you can see what are the mechanism, the successful and unsuccessful mechanism that happen in other industry. Let me give you an example. The famous razor blade business model. So the idea that Gillette came up with to basically give a razor at a reduced price or sometimes even for free and overcharging the blades so that when you actually see the cost of the blades, you feel like you want to cut your throat in the other way. It's been imported in many other industries, like for example, the printing with the cartridges or the coffee with Nespresso. And the point is, you could see the value of this business model by exploring what Gillette had been built through this business model through the years. So first of all, try to look at comparison in other industries if there's something that maybe inspired you. And the second thing is you can develop, especially in the online world, some sort of trials for your consumer to give you feedback, early feedbacks before actually releasing the business model.
Very interesting. So one of the trends that we see in the market these days is pure play physical product companies. Let's say, for instance, fast moving consumer goods companies, say the Unilever or P&G. Given the situation right now, they traditionally operated in the B2B space, but they were essentially selling to retailers all over the world. Many of them are considering going direct to consumers. What would you think? I mean, they clearly are trying to sell online direct to consumers. What's your take on this transition? Is it a worthwhile move? Is it risky? Will it work out? What are they trying to do over there?
I think it might be, profitable in the short run, because basically you're bypassing the distribution channel, which of course increases the cost. However, we all hope that sooner or later we will go back to standard life, and at that point the distribution will still be very very valuable. Especially because with few exception of companies like Unilever or P&G, there are few companies who can really provide a true one-stop shop experience. I mean, even Procter & Gamble, that has multiple products, one of the biggest product portfolio ever, would not fulfill the needs, the complete needs of a family in terms of, for example, they don't provide much in terms of groceries, fresh groceries. Yeah. And so you would have to shop across multiple platforms, and so they would diminish their one-stop shop. So honestly, I think I would rather see more useful the production company to collaborate with the distribution to create more effective and efficient distribution channels that maybe work through online, like Ocado, for example.
Right.
And so make maybe that kind of passage more efficient. Also, in order not to jeopardize a long-term relationship and alliance that they had with this type of distributors that will come incredibly helpful once we go back to normal life.
Yeah, yeah. There was something that struck me when you were perhaps making a joke at my Corona hair and suggesting that you don't need a haircut. I wanted to ask you, I mean, clearly a lot of these kind of choices would depend on the nature of the product. For instance, if I'm Amazon and I have a digital product, like say movies, I can clearly build on my existing network and sell the digital product. Whereas if I'm a hairdresser, where I'm essentially trying to sell a physical product, then perhaps I can use an existing network to get to my customer or identify those customers. And in this mix, I assume data about the customer will be very useful for these sellers in this market, right? So even for a company like P&G or Unilever that have traditionally been B2B, perhaps a little bit of B2C might also potentially give them new data, new insight about customers. Is that potentially something that they should consider?
Yeah, I mean, data is the new black, or it's the new gold, whatever you want to call it. Now, the point is, a lot of companies have data, and not many of them know how to read them. And
Right.
usually they lie somewhere. And most of all, majority of companies study the data within the business unit. So we know a lot about the consumption of one product, but we don't know much about the relationship between, for example, companies that work as platforms connecting multiple groups. So the network effects between the two groups, or even more, the indirect network effects. So the effects across customer groups that are part of different business models. Let me give you an example of this. So there is a study that says that when people have Amazon Prime, even if they got Amazon Prime for watching the movies, their chances of buying something online, which is bundle, which bundles the shipping, increase of around 30-35%. So imagine you get it for the movies, but you end up buying things online. And this happens the other way around too. If you buy Amazon Prime for the shipping, the chances that you will actually start using it for the movies increases, which means that if you have more movie producer that put movie online, you have more chance of people joining for the movies. But the more chance of people joining for the movies, the more chances people will buy online, which means the more chances retailers will put their products online. So indirectly, the more movie producer put movies online, the more retailers will put products online. And these are indirect, what is called indirect network effects, which are even more complex and subtle to capture. So the starting point is data. Of course, you need data. And then you need to know how to analyze them. And luckily, at CAS, we have courses for that. I know you teach one of those, so.
No, thanks, Paolo. I mean, of course, that's very, very insightful. I mean, clearly, what you're suggesting is data essentially gets your foot in the door. And once you know your customer, you can potentially upsell more into those customer segments. Yeah, that's very insightful. There's a very interesting question, and what you just mentioned is a nice segue into that question, which is, hang on a minute, wouldn't it require different kinds of organizational capabilities to implement these kind of structures? And as we know, many large organizations, for instance, they operate in silos. They often do not share data across different divisions, etc. I mean, I suppose in theory, in a business school, in air-conditioned classrooms, it's absolutely fine. But in reality, what's your take on organizational capabilities to actually execute this?
I think it requires really a change in the organizational structure that might, underpin a different organizational capability. Because interesting, the business model is always being seen as a business level construct. So the people who take care of the business model are usually the executives that are at the lead of basically the business division. But practically, if you really want to unleash the power of the business model and in a portfolio, you need figures who understand business model at the corporate level. And this is why, for example, with our paper, we talk about business model diversification. Diversification is traditionally a term that is associated to corporate decisions. So usually decisions that relate to international expansion, product expansion. So the business model experts, hopefully many of these will be CAS alumni, will have to understand this kind of logics across business model. And what we hope is that companies will really appreciate the importance of these kind of figures, which through data-driven analytical processes will be able to connect the value creation across different business models in a portfolio.
Right. So let's assume for a minute the company or any organization that wants to make this kind of a transition, they have been able to invest in these kind of capabilities, have invested in these kind of teams, etc. And let's go back to the first question, I think it was from Damien, was essentially suggesting, okay, fine, if we are setting up different kinds of experiments, if you may, would you have any suggestions to what might be some of the key performance indicators of these kind of tests, if you may? So the reason why I ask is Ali, who's asking, is there a way that companies can stress test the long-term profitability of going direct to consumers, for instance, rather than going B2B? I mean, clearly Ali has a long-term view in this mind versus short-term. Needless to say, we are experiencing a very unique, rare event. But in the long term, is there a way that companies can project what kind of revenues? Can they do some stress tests? Any thoughts, any ideas on that?
Absolutely. So, well, of course, we are in the field of management. So social sciences and business are not exact sciences. The thing that one needs to do is create different type of scenarios and base these scenarios of different assumptions. And based on the assumption, try to forecast what the impact might be. Let me give you an example. If bypassing your long-term distributor ally will jeopardize the relationship with the distributor, assuming that you will have to replace this distributor once you actually, are in need of access, direct physical access to the market as it used to be, what would be the switching costs? And would the switching costs be superior or inferior to the advantages that you could potentially have by saving money, bypassing the distributor in first place? So I think the important thing is to create some sort of, scenarios and try to look at the likelihood of these scenarios to happen. Of course, the perfect storm can happen. What are the chances, that, Brexit and pandemic happen at the same time? But in the end, these things happen. In the end, when the Spanish flu happened, it happened in correspondence of a world war. So these things can happen. And the best thing that we can do to adapt is to be pre-adapted, right? So being in the first part of those companies I was mentioning, so try to develop flexible capabilities that can allow us to operate both online and offline, spreading our risk across a portfolio business model that help us pivot across different business units and customer engagement opportunities so that we don't put all the eggs in the same basket in case this perfect storm hits again.
Right. That's, again, extremely useful. So you're essentially suggesting one way to test your system is essentially to diversify your portfolio and get different options so that you're not too exposed into one specific area. That's very useful. I also wanted to follow up on another point, which I'm sure it's on the back of everyone's mind, which is clearly, as we see in the world these days, Amazon is clearly a very large, dominant platform. And on the other side, of the world, we have Alibaba, that's a major dominant platform. Yeah. If I'm a business that is interested in perhaps or sees value in moving into the platform side, is it already too late? Is the world already divided between Amazon and Alibaba, and we should just give up and let them have
Absolutely. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So first of all, Alibaba and Amazon are dominating in terms of breadth of their portfolio, but they are not leading in all the categories. So we know, for example, that in the movie categories, Netflix is a tough competitor as a platform to Amazon. In the furniture, Wayfair, which is a reasonably young company, is doing incredibly well, more than Amazon at the moment. And usually the logic of disruption in the digital world is that some specialized player tries to carve a niche and from there expand. And if you can look at this in the great logic, for example, of Google versus Amazon, right? For many years, people have been considering the main competitor of Google being Bing, right? Because they were basically delivering the same type of service. Google was much better, had much more, users. But then ultimately, the biggest competitor of Google became Amazon, because Amazon tried to capture one specific and specialize on one specific type of search, which is a very valuable search, the search that leads to a purchase. Because the business model of companies who are on the search industry online is about connecting sellers to buyers, if you can channel through your platforms the great majority of people and users who are searching for buying, you basically have a very interesting audience for your advertisers. And this is a way in which Amazon entered, silently, step up after step, in one specific type of search, which is the search for buying goods, and expanded to a point that ended up bothering Google even in other fields, like, for example, other type of searches, becoming a reference point in terms of price determination for users and videos and other type of experiences. And now they're expanding even in financial services. So the game is never over, right? How many of us had a Nokia phone 15 years ago? And how many of us have it today, right?
I still have it. I'm waiting for the Museum of Mobile Phones to open up, and then I'll donate it to that museum. Paolo, thank you so much. We are just over our allotted time for this session. It was an absolute pleasure to have chatted with you and discussed some futures of digital business models. There were a couple of questions asking already about your paper. Just to remind everyone, the paper, I assume, is on Paolo's CAS website anyway, so you can access the paper from Paolo's CAS website. I assume, Paolo, you will also be very happy to take any future questions. If they have, they can write to you directly and ask some more questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I wanted also to share the upcoming webinars since we are here. I hope you can see my screen now. And June 24th, Marketing, Branding, Global Crisis, right?
Yes. So
that's the next one.
Yes, 24th of June is Marketing, Branding, and Global Crisis. 1st of July is Virtual M&A and Private Equity. And on 8th of July is Recharging Mind and Body, Steps to Improve Your Endurance. Yeah. So these are the next 3 webinars. So please keep an eye out for them. Do register on our website, the CAS webinar series, the summer series, Food for Thought. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks to Paolo.
Thank you for having me here.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Thanks.
See you. Bye-bye.